Welcome everybody to video number 11 in this series when we're looking at biblical marriage, with a particular emphasis on exposing the usual orthodox and traditional arguments refuting polygamy, or better still, polygyny. I hope you're enjoying the series. It's going to be quite an extensive one. We will go back to the Old Testament once we've concluded the usual passages from the New that are used to argue against polygamy. And I hope you're using these videos as an impetus to deeper study, plenty of references on the internet, and sharing them with your friends. Remember, we're not promoting polygamy, telling anybody to rush off and marry more than one wife. We're exposing the errors of tradition and the falsehoods of the doctrines of men, and we're opening the word of truth. Last time we looked at Matthew chapter 19, and we saw that the Pharisees were tempting the Lord. And they said, is it lawful? Notice, the law. In Matthew 4 and 5, the Lord refers back to Genesis chapter 2 in his response about the twain becoming kin, becoming one flesh. We have also seen up till this point that Genesis 2:24 is not violated when a man has more than one wife. Genesis 2:24 never used against any of God's servants who had more than one wife. Here it is used in a context of divorce. It's so important we know context, isn't it? Divorce. The Lord says in verse 6, wherefore what God hath joined together, let not man, that is any husband, put asunder. Do you see? A husband don't put asunder what God has joined together. Well, they said, what about the writing of divorcement out of Deuteronomy 24? Some uncleanness in her, remember? And the Lord said, because of the hardness of your hearts. Now I'm sure that you have heard pastors, preachers, televangelists, theologians of every rank and from every denomination tell you that the hardness of a man's heart is about polygamy. No, it isn't. We have our Bibles we can read. It's about divorce. Now then, in verse 9, the Lord gives his ruling, saying, whosoever shall put away his wife, except it be for fornication, and shall marry another, commits adultery. So the husband who puts away a wife, save for fornication, and marries another is committing adultery. But under the law, Exodus 21, Deuteronomy 21, a man who took another wife was not committing adultery. But if he put away a wife, save for fornication, do you see? In verse 10, the disciples said unto him, if the case of the man be so with his wife, it's not good to marry. Well, we won't go there, but we notice put away, Genesis 2:24, fornication and divorce. And that question of the disciples takes us to our next passage, 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 1 and 2. This is frequently used as some refutation for polygamy. But once again, if we carefully examine the context, we'll find this has nothing to do with marriage structure. And it's perfectly in harmony with Genesis 2:24. It's perfectly in harmony with Matthew chapter 5, 31 and 32, Matthew 19, and Romans chapter 7. 1 Corinthians 7 verse 1. Now, concerning the things whereof you wrote unto me, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. A bit like the disciples, Matthew 19 verse 10. Verse 2. Nevertheless, to avoid fornication, let every man have his own wife, and let every woman have her own husband. In the matter of intimacy, did Paul say? Nevertheless, to avoid fornication, let every man have his own wife, and let every woman have her own husband. He's not saying this is how marriage must be, one man and one woman. He said to avoid fornication, which he's spoken about or written about in chapter 6. Well, we go back to verse 15 of chapter 6. And Paul writes this, know ye not that your bodies are the members of Christ? He's writing about bodies. Remember, chapter breaks were put in by man much later, don't exist when Paul wrote the letter to the Corinthians. Verse 16, What? Know ye not that he is joined to an harlot is one body? For two, saith he, shall be one flesh. Genesis 2:24. Unity. Joining. And when a married man goes to be with a harlot, he's one flesh with her, as well as being one flesh with his wife. Genesis 2:24 does not mean one husband and one wife exclusively. Now, in verse 18, flee fornication. Do you see? Flee fornication. Verse 20, for you are bought with a price, therefore glorify God in your body. That's what this is all about. And in your spirit, which are God's. Nevertheless, verse 2 of the next chapter, to avoid fornication, let every man have his own wife. Do you know the word own here? For the husband is simply a reflexive, that which belongs to him. But the word for own in the original language, Paul being very sensitive and knowing the law, the word for own husband is idios. That wife is married to that husband exclusively. In Romans chapter 7, Paul says in verse 2, he writes, the woman which hath an husband is bound by the law to her husband. Did you know that? The woman is bound by the law to her husband. The law confirming Genesis 2:24. She's one flesh with him. But we've already seen in the law, Exodus 21, Deuteronomy 21, that if a man took another wife, he's not bound by the law to his wife exclusively, but she is to him. Isn't this fascinating? Paul using the law in the New Testament to show marriage, to affirm Genesis 2:24, unity of flesh. The Lord in Matthew 19, showing unity of Genesis 2:24. Neither Matthew 5, Matthew 19, or 1 Corinthians 7 abolishes anything about a man taking more than one wife. Confirmed by the very words Paul used when he wrote in the original language to these Corinthians. Now here's something else. In 1 Corinthians chapter 10, in 1 Corinthians 7 verse 10, Paul writing to the believers who are married, he says, and unto the married believers I command, yet not I, but the Lord. Let not the wife depart from her husband. And if she depart, let her remain unmarried. Why? Matthew 5, Matthew 19. If she departs and goes with another man, it's adultery. And the man who is with her, adultery. Because she is still married and bound by the law while her husband is alive. Or she has to be reconciled to her husband, who is hers exclusively under the law. 1 Corinthians 7:2 is not talking about marriage structure. It's talking about the unity that was made between that husband and that wife. Now, if in the meantime this husband goes and marries another woman, he's not bound exclusively to either. And if the first wife that departed comes back, then he is to take her back and let her be reconciled to him. That's the context of 1 Corinthians 7, 1 and 2. Superficially, some people say, oh, 1 Corinthians 7, verse 2 says, a husband must have one wife. No, it doesn't say that at all. It says to avoid fornication, let each have his wife and husband. That's what it says. And in 1 Corinthians 7, 10 and 11, we find that confirmation of the law referred to in Romans 7, that a woman is bound by the law to her husband while he lives. But the law says a husband can have more than one wife. Paul doesn't change 1 ounce of the law in either Corinthians or Romans. It's perfectly in harmony with the law, Genesis 2:24, and the Lord's rulings in Matthew 5 and 19. I hope you use these videos as a launch pad to your deeper studies of this subject, so that you will see the shallowness and the absolute anti-biblical approach taken by tradition to demand monogamy only. Biblical marriage is monogamy or polygamy, and it hasn't changed in the old or the new. May the Lord bless you.